Without further ado.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Engaged, Not Exhausted, active learning that respects attention and energy. We're going to get you all started off with some attention and energy. If you could turn to a partner and discuss the question, what are the characteristics of teaching environments that inspire you to learn? All right. Thank you all so much for engaging with our first question. Excellent. Okay, I want 2 examples from the audience. What is a characteristic of a teaching environment that inspires you to learn? How about at this table here?
We talked about engagement, interest, attainable, connection.
Great. So many good ideas. How about at this table here? What's a characteristic of a teaching environment that inspires you to learn?
Well, we had 2 thoughts. We had physical proximity we thought could help, but then we also thought being alone distance-wise could actually also help sometimes. And the other interesting term was puzzles, that we were all solving some kind of puzzle.
What cool ideas. How about over here? One last characteristic.
Relevance, authenticity.
Relevance and authenticity. What great characteristics. Okay, thanks everyone for playing. Again, welcome to anyone new in the room to Engage, Not Exhausted, active learning that respects attention and energy. We've got some great faculty panelists here today. My name is Chloe, I'm at the Bach Center, and my co-presenter here, co-facilitator is, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone, I'm David Ginnings, I'm at the School of Public Health.
And we are going to ask you one more question, which is, turn back to your team and share a moment, and maybe instead of having a full group, maybe find 2 or 3 people to talk to. What is it that made you inspired to engage in this active learning environment that you're thinking about? And what conditions made that kind of activity possible? We'll take 2 more minutes to address these last 2 questions.
Yeah, so maybe let's hear from this table in the front. Like, share a moment when you felt like your students were engaged. What inspired you to engage? What were the conditions that made that possible? Yeah.
So we talked about how active learning, the most, when we were personally engaged as students or as teaching, that there were still structure and
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. It's like intentionality to the design. It's clear to students what's expected of them. Yeah, but still like balancing freedom. Okay, great. So yeah, a lot of words on this slide, but this is our session description. We'll just try to make it like clear to you all that our goals for this session is to first acknowledge that it's a lot of load in creating and designing learning experiences, and it can be exhausting. Then we have some panelists who will share some examples of like how this has happened, how they've designed or facilitated this within their context. And then we kind of have a shift to like, how do you sustain yourself throughout the term in doing this? Yeah, with the assumption that this could be kind of exhausting and very renewing.
All right, so we have 4 esteemed faculty panelists with us today, and we have given them the nearly impossible task of responding to the prompt, a teaching strategy in which the students in their class were engaged in active learning, and then what role they played in designing and facilitating those conditions. And we are asking them to summarize that in 3 minutes. A brief introduction here for our panelists. Jesse Hoffman-Garskuk from the Harvard College in the History Department. We have Matthew Miller from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, Greg Meyer from the Harvard Medical School, and Bonnie Blanchfield from the Harvard School of Public Health. Welcome to everyone. We look forward to hearing about your teaching strategies. And I will ask you to stand when you're giving your presentation. We have microphones on the table here. And our first is Jesse. Take it away.
Well, first of all, thank you all for coming. It's so exciting to be in a room full of people who want to think about and talk about teaching. This was an impossible assignment, and it's also an oxymoronic assignment to do a very quick presentation and throw a bunch of ideas at you about the idea of engaging. So all right. So, and also I had too many things that I wanted to share, and the ones that I, thought would be really cool and people would be really excited about are, most of them I had to leave on the cutting room floor. So I'm going to talk about just solo writing. And remember, I'm a history teacher. This is in the context of courses where there's lots of experiences of active learning, most of which engage students with each other. Most of the active learning is like what we did today, which is to say, speak at a table, speak to a partner, or many times it's also the whole group, right? Who wants to raise their hand and engage with me on a question or a discussion? And solo writing, I mix in there, and I do it graded for completion about 10 times a semester, where basically I give students what would look like something like a blue book question, and I give them 10 minutes to answer it in class. And oftentimes and then at the end of the semester, one of their questions on their oral final exam is to pick the best piece of writing that they did over the semester and to talk about how they might change it at the later point in the semester. Why universal engagement? This is one thing that I know every individual student will do. That is to say, active learning oftentimes allows students to hide, or students who don't feel confident in their skills to rely on other students. In fact, when I just get into the big discussion with the group, I know some students in the room are thinking, oh, this is the time when that student talks with the professor. So they can relax, right? But you can't relax when you have to write on your own. And of course, again, I'm a history professor, so writing is one of the skills that I want them to be able to take away. But I also want them to feel responsible for having their own take on the question, rather than thinking that they just have to feel good about having been part of a conversation in which somebody had a good take on the question. I also do this for spaced repetition. I usually ask a question that's about the material we covered a week or two ago, right? So the group activities, the classroom activities that we're doing, the things that I'm talking about will be about the reading you did for today, but your solo writing is going to be about something that you read a week and a half or 2 weeks ago. And I know that this is much more effective way of using solo writing than a final exam for actually changing students' brains, which is of course what we want to do, right? A final exam is good at testing whether they can respond under pressure and study a lot of things in one night. But spaced repetition for this kind of thing requires them under a small amount of pressure to try and remember something that they did know 2 weeks ago. And that actually is demonstrated by brain science, which probably some of you know a lot more than me about, to actually help with learning and long-term in the long term. And the last thing it does is that if I give a question that none of them know how to answer, it tells me that I didn't do a good job of teaching that topic and I have to come back to it, right? And so I oftentimes will build in 10 or 15 minutes to go back to a topic that a lot of the students really struggled with. And they feel bad about it, but in the end, we all feel better about the fact that they were able to learn it. How do I do this? Well, I have to write the prompts, but that's not so different from writing a final exam. I have to manage TF time. In this instance, it's a large class. I need to make sure that I'm not asking TFs to read these in addition to other things, it demands on their time that are unfair. And then we need to make sure that we find a way of reflecting back to them that we actually are taking seriously their writing, because they all will realize very quickly that there's really no stakes. It's supposed to be low stakes, but it shouldn't be no stakes. And then we also have to manage student anxiety. So for example, we did have a question early this semester where none of them were able to answer it, right? It was the main point of the previous lecture and none of them got it. And so, and these are Harvard students, right? So it's not common for them to sit down in front of something that feels like an exam, even though there's no grading, and to just totally blank and not know, right? So that's productive for learning, but it can also produce a lot of anxiety, which gets in the way of learning. So we do those kinds of things. Am I at 3 minutes? Hey, thanks, Chloe.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Ed School. It's nice to have you here. Okay, so in 3 minutes, I want to tell you about an exercise. I am officially the most meta of your speakers because I teach an education school class about active learning in higher education at a HILT conference about the same subject, okay? So, but I hope that what I do is actually in some way reusable, and maybe it resonates with some kinds of things that you do as learning design. So, in my very first class, I have had students read a number of cognitive science approaches and experimental evidence around active learning. We are often running at the beginning with the meta-analyses and frameworks and so forth. And these are graduate students at the Ed School who are very interested in teaching in universities, or they are learning designers who are actually designing apps, software, curricula, and so forth. And so in an exercise, what I have them do is I have them read about a cognitive science framework that we refer to as ICAP, which is by Mickey Chi and Ruth Wiley. Cognitive scientist Mickey Chi is well known for her work on the development of expertise, particularly in STEM learning, but she also came up with a way to look at classroom settings and observing student behaviors and the demands of their tasks to identify on a continuum whether what students were doing was passive all the way to what she terms interactive, meaning that students are actually constructing new ideas, leveraging what they already know, and doing it socially with other students. So it's almost like, without saying that students always have to be in I for interactive, you would expect in an active learning classroom that's where students are learning to see lots of I-related behaviors. Okay, so what do? I give students a transcript of several minutes of someone I think of as a Harvard hero of active learning, Dan Levy from the Harvard Kennedy School. So shout out to Dan. And the students watch with transcripts in hand, and we watch it live. I don't ask them to prepare it in advance or ask ChatGPT to tell them what to see in the video or the transcript. We watch it live, and they annotate the transcript live with the framework we've been studying. Then I have them turn to one another and debate. So they prepare in advance of class. I also set up the experience. They view, they annotate, they compare their codings with a partner or or in a trio, and then we come back and we have a discussion where I try to help harvest from the trios some insights where I know one of the biggest things they will struggle with is distinguishing between the constructive and interactive points in this continuum. So the coding exercise is designed to surface disagreement about how to code so that we can then debrief it together. Then we follow up, and students have post-class reflections where I hear the sense they're making from them and give them feedback within 24 hours on what they share about their responses to the exercise. And I'm happy to share all the details. Also a plug for Instructional Moves, which is where I get the video of Dan Levy, a resource available to everyone here and beyond the Harvard community. What's my role? I design it. I prepare an advance organizer. I'm facilitating live I need to know what misconceptions they're likely to have so that I can probe those misconceptions live in the debrief. And then I follow up individually in responding to students' thinking and reactions to the exercise. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. I'm Greg Meyer. I'm a professor at the medical school and also at the Harvard School of Public Health. And actually have the privilege of teaching in various settings ranging from the bedside with medical students and residents to executive education and to some classroom teaching as well. And this is some work that I've done with Bonnie in a course that we teach together at the Harvard School of Public Health and value-based care. Value-based care involves interactions between health insurers, between physician groups and provider groups, and between hospitals and healthcare systems. And what we try to do to engage students in the middle of the class, right, this is halfway through the term and kind of when a lot of energy can be at a nadir, I think, as many of us experience. We actually have an exercise where we try to get them engaged in something that's very real and very authentic. And that is, what we do is we say, you are now going to have to produce a negotiated contract with your colleagues that actually takes into mind some of the things that we taught them in the first half of the class and really creates a real product, a contract that they've negotiated between each other. The way we do this is we've done a lot of work on the what and the why during the first half of the class. We divide the class up into 3 groups. One group is a group of physicians. Another group is a group that represent health insurers. Another group is a hospital system. And we give them various roles. And those roles were actually developed by folks that we bring in to help act as facilitators. These are folks who do this in real life. So we bring in somebody from the insurance world who negotiates with physicians and hospitals. We bring somebody from the hospital world who negotiates with insurers. We bring someone from physicians who negotiates with hospitals and insurers. So they have very real life examples and folks who are coaching them on this. They get a set of of here's what your motivations are. Here's what you're trying to achieve. And oh yes, this is very real. And by the way, it's quite competitive, right? Because everyone is trying to make sure that they get the best deal for themselves. And so after we lay that groundwork, we give them about 10 days to break off in their groups, to kind of set up their strategy within their small group, within, for example, a group of physicians, but then actually to start to interact with their counterparts from the insurance world, from the hospital world, with the notion being that there's some tension there, a lot of discomfort, and frankly, it throws students kind of into the deep end of the pool a bit. But I think in many ways, that's where you learn the most, with a time constraint, because you have to come up with a contract and then you have to present that contract. One of the things that we are wary of is that notion that someone can hide in a group. And so we actually have them actually more or less grade each other on their participation in the exercise. And I think that brings a certain amount of discipline to that. What role do we play in terms of trying to make this happen? We provide them with the background on why this is important, how this is very real. This is a very kind of real life exercise. We bring in those facilitators who have real live negotiation experience. And one of the things that we benefit from is a number of the students at the School of Public Health have taken negotiation classes at the Kennedy School and at the School of Public Health and elsewhere around Harvard. And so this really gives them a chance to put it into real life. And then we create real world time pressure. Like, you got to do this. And by the way, you're kind of doing this in the evenings and all the rest, and it really mimics the way things really play out in the real world. As someone who's gone through this in reality many, many times. And we find that it's a really powerful way to get them to really get engaged in the materials that they learn the first half of the course, and to apply it to something that many of them are actually going to be doing during the rest of their careers. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, thank you. So Bonnie and I teach at the School of Public Health, and the course that Greg just talked about is fun and exciting. But the course I'm going to talk about is financial accounting and financial analysis for public health students who are really not coming to the School of Public Health to learn that. So it's required. There's about 70 students, 50 to 70 it ranges, but more lately 70. So it's difficult. Physicians who've never seen any financial information, and then a lot of younger students who basically, everybody tells me they're afraid. They're intimidated. They don't want to take it. So my goal is to get them to like it at the end. And so how I do it is I have it designed in two parts. First part is for them to learn basic things. And I don't lecture. I think that would be a disaster for this topic with public health students. So we do cases, and I give them a chance to look at it the night before. And then the next class, we do it together. And I really ask them to participate, tell me what they think, and it offers an opportunity for me to then lecture a little bit more about the topic without having to go in and lecture. So I think it works. Halfway through, we do that. Then we switch gears. And one thing I do at the very beginning, the first class, is actually the goal is to learn to read financial statements. So I put them up and I say, okay, management students, can you read this? Why would you want to read this? What this is going to tell you at the end. So I think it gets them a little excited. And then a big group of the students are policy students, and policy and management generally are going to battle in the real world in healthcare. So I actually show the policy students, what would you do with this? And, where might these financial statements not tell you exactly what's happening? So I show them how they're going to be able to use this material at the end. In the second half of the class, I use real financial statements of real hospitals, and I teach them how to analyze it. But again, not to lecture. So we break into groups, and people are intimidated and afraid to raise their, even physicians are afraid to speak up and say what they think. And so I have them break into little groups and then report back. And that way everybody has an opportunity to say something they might feel is dumb in their little group, and then represent it as to the whole class. And then there's some debate, because of what I've also taught them, and even though accounting has rules, there really is a lot of creativity in accounting. And I try to show them the fun and the creativity that they can have. And I think by having them come back and speak in a group is where there's an opportunity to have some debate. Not everybody has to agree. And then usually I have them vote at the end of, is this a hospital doing really well or terrible or someplace in the middle? And oftentimes I will take the opposite of what a different position, to just show them how there's no one right answer, as long as they can justify it. So I'm happy at the end if I can see their faces light up, and if they feel like they learned something. They don't have to be CFOs. They just have to learn how to, I tell them, fake it to make it, is passing. So.
All right, thanks so much to all of those great ideas for teaching engaged, active learning in a way that is sustainable for you as the educator. We're going to have a little bit of discussion in the groups, and then we'll open it up to Q&A so that you can ask our faculty panelists for further ideas in your own teaching practice. So the first question that we're going to ask you to talk about in your group, how might you implement or adapt some of the ideas that you just heard from our faculty panelists into your own teaching environments? You'll have 3 minutes for this.
Okay, great. I hope you all have made some new relationships and found some partners in this work. We're actually going to go ahead and shift to the next question instead of having a share out on this. But so as we mentioned earlier, designing active learning environments take a lot of work. And so we're just curious, where you feel this cognitive load. And then also, how do you work through that, or how do you stay engaged in it?
As an example, David and I were tasked with coming up with a session that met the needs of faculty and staff at the college and across all of the professional schools. And it should be centering active learning. And we had an hour and a faculty panel. So it took longer to prepare for this session than we had planned. That was part of our cognitive load. Another example is just in the moment, my microphone wasn't loud enough to interrupt. I have a pretty loud voice and I still couldn't get in and start talking. So that clapping thing just was a pivot in the last minute, right? And thanks to Jesse who picked up on it with me. But those are two examples of the work that I had to do to facilitate this session and facilitating sessions, back to the meta situation that we find ourselves in. So if you want to turn to your table and think about where that cognitive load lands for you in preparing for and building these conditions that make active learning possible.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks everyone for participation. Maybe now we hear from our panelists.
Yeah, so I would love to ask our 4 esteemed faculty guests to join me up here in the front of the room to prompt you with a question. What are strategies that the 4 of you have used to stay energized in your teaching throughout the semester? Given that you are all centering this kind of active learning, and we know that active learning takes a lot of work and logistics and can be stressful in the moment when you're adjusting to the demands of the people in the room, what are strategies that you all have used?
Our semester's only half. It's 8 weeks, so I don't have to stay energized as long. And I'd say
Great tip. Thanks, Molly.
I'm very energized. I want to be on my toes. I guess I'm very energized and I hate to say it, exhausted at the end, but I meet with students a lot. I try to meet them in the hall, tell them to come to my office. It gives me a lot of insight into what people are learning and where their trouble is. And sometimes 70 faces are staring at me and I can't tell whether they're bored or they don't understand it or they get it and they want me to move on. So that exhausts me, but then I meet with students a lot outside of the classroom. And I think that's what energizes me. And also when they say, wow, I got it. No, I didn't understand it, but now I really do. And that keeps me happy.
Yeah. So this is, I was thinking before Bonnie spoke of something similar, which is in order for me to take risks in my teaching, I have to know that I'm not getting too far from what students are experiencing. So call it an entirely selfish part of my teaching is to talk a lot to students about what's going on in class. And I also like to, I learned well in my very first kind of faculty development meeting that it was a good idea to figure out what went well in class and what could be improved right in class to hear from students. And the trust building that creates can be, I think, a virtuous circle where students are willing to take more risks because they think they have a professor who cares about whether they're learning. And you're doing that through what you demonstrate in class and how you talk to them in between and outside of class. And frankly, the level of investment you have in them as individual people, which I think is also it sort of keeps me really energized because the relational benefits of getting to know my students and their aspirations, I feel like helps me push when I don't have the energy to push.
Yeah, for me, the most exhausting teaching actually is bedside teaching with medical students and residents. It's high stakes, it's high pressure. You are always under a lot of time constraints. And frankly, you're dealing with a group of learners who are incredibly burnt out. That is the state that they live in during residency and medical school. And to me, what energizes me, and I hope energizes them, is trying to always take time to say, not just to understand, what's the matter with this patient and discuss that and learn from that, but actually have them engage in discussions with patients of what matters to that patient and get them to start to get the joy of understanding that, yes, we're trying to take care of this person with their heart failure, but what matters to them most is being able to dance at their granddaughter's wedding in 3 weeks, right? And that really kind of just re-energizes everybody as we go along, because otherwise it could just absolutely steal your soul.
So I was thinking about this. Usually I have a kind of a course over the course of a semester when I'm teaching where I sort of start out and in a group with a group of students, and they're like, oh, this is a different kind of class than what we usually experience. And I start to feel really good, and they start to feel really good. And then I feel like I'm an active learning hero and I'm so wonderful. And I come out of class and I'm feeling great after class. And about, the 5th week of class, I start to think, wait a second, maybe the emperor has no clothes. And all of these students are completely incentivized to give me the kind of feedback that I think I'm getting from them. And in fact, I'm a big idiot and I don't know what I'm doing. And actually, maybe I'm just a poser, and maybe I'm just like totally addicted to the sense that I'm actually a hero. So that's kind of where I am right now. Thank you all for giving me the feedback that I need about that. But so how do I deal with that? I think the thing that actually in the end, makes me come back to it over and over again. First is that I'm addicted to those feelings, but second is that I try and balance doing new things every time, right? So I usually in the syllabus, I'll be like, I'm going to do all those tried and true things, which I know work because I've developed them over time. I've got the system down. And then I'm always like, and I'm going to do something that I've never done before and try and really do it. And a lot of times those are things that have, right now I'm trying to figure out how I can take a group of students to observe immigration court hearings that are happening now, which are now closed and the government is closed down. And actually it's much more dangerous than it used to be to take them. So there's a whole, and it's really hard to get in touch with the court. So we promised them, they signed up for this class because they're going to get to do that. And now we have to figure out how to do it. And that's keeping me up at night, but also keeping me energized.
What great responses. All right, so we are going to turn to questions from the audience, but while we are giving you a minute to think about your questions, I would just make an observation of a theme that I'm seeing between our plenary session across the street and these here is I'm seeing a connection between the devices down and the connecting individually with students, that there is this sea of faces and you're not totally sure what's coming from them, if they're getting it and they're plugged in and you're a hero, or if they're just giving you what you want. And so making the time to connect with them, getting that feedback from them, having it be a really personal and interactive, I think that was good, not just active, but interactive is where we seem to be getting a lot of our energy from. So, questions from the audience. Yes, take it away.
Hi, thank you so much. I learned so much today. My name is Liao. I'm on the faculty here at the ed school. So my question is, I use maybe half of my class time for active learning, and I collect feedback from students after every class. And usually it's about 80% of students who say, oh, I think the discussion seems to be the right amount. But then the rest of the students would say, 10% of them will say, oh, I hate discussion, you should lecture more. And the other 10% would say, I want more discussion, we want more interactive activities. So I used to just suppress my inner people pleaser and say, it's okay, I'll just live with it. But I'm just wondering, since you're the expert, whether you have any advice on what to do with those 20% of students who have really different preferences for active learning or, the more traditional way of lecturing.
Oh, I can actually maybe answer that because I just sent a mid-course survey and had some questions and got some answers back that I didn't mixed. It's a mixed bag of whether people like to break out in groups or not. And I'm thinking about what I'm going to do about it because this year was probably the most decisive range of answers. What I think I'm going to do is write back and make decisions about what I'm going to do. But let them know I heard what they had to say and respond back to the questions, to the answers. And, if I'm still going to do something that some people don't like, I'm going to try to explain. I don't know if I'm going to do it in an announcement on Canvas, or actually talk to them at the start of class about, well, we're doing this, and I know you all don't like it, but we're doing it because this is what we're going to get out of it. Because I don't want to ask for feedback and then not respond back. So that's my plan. I don't know if it's going to work, and I don't know if other people have better ideas, but you can't please everybody all the time.
I just want to reflect back at you that you told us that 80% of the people are giving you feedback that you're doing the right thing. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty incredible. So, and I mean, that may be that may be a high estimate or whatever. But I remember when I over time have come to think about how to respond to student responses in that way differently, because I used to come in and perform, I'm responding to every one of you who criticized this class, and I was like, oh right, 6 of you criticized the class, and I have come in and made everybody listen to your criticisms and then bend over backwards to deal with that. And so I actually would suggest coming in and saying, thank you for the feedback. So many of you are suggesting that this is exactly what you need. And then I also do the meta thing where I'm like, let's talk about what you're learning, right? So what do you enjoy, but what are you learning? Like, I know sometimes things that you don't enjoy are the things that are going to make you learn. And I know you're going to be mad at me, and I know you're not going to like me, but I'm going to still do those things because what I care more about is your learning.
Great. We have another question from our audience here.
Hi, I'm interested to know whether you are using AI in planning your courses, and how are you encouraging or discouraging the use of AI among your students?
Yeah, we probably all have a reaction to that. So an elective course that the one I was just talking about that I started last year is the first course that I've ever planned when AI was a resource. And I have to admit, a lot of what I did was using the Harvard sandbox to test assignments with the low temperature setting so that I could get reliable repeats if I fed it into an algorithm to see what kinds of responses I would likely get from students if they were to use a strategy that I could predict they would use, which is to feed the syllabus, feed the assignment, feed the supporting text or readings. This was the era of Google sort of really, pushing out. It's outdated now already, but where you could drop all the files in, and then you could just get a general summary of all those files and take the next step. Right now, you can do that with all the LLMs. So on my planning side, that was more my emphasis, was trying to stay a step ahead of kind of student strategies that as I was talking about at our table earlier, where I thought I need to understand how students might both help their learning and how they might shortcut their own learning. But then what happened when I offered the class, my students were very interested in us wrestling with how everything we talked about implicated AI in the future of learning design and the future of teaching. So I basically designed on the spot, as I would go into each week, a short application activity where they would take something that we've done, and then I would ask them a really difficult question. I'll just give you an example of it. So, for example, when we're talking about the literature, something that we talk about a lot and that Harvard has actually produced through, particularly in studies that have happened in science and the FAS, lots of studies that have been influential about peer learning and its impact, particularly in STEM disciplines, right? So when we talk about that, the extension that I had for the students was to get them to have a debate about whether an AI bot can ever truly be a peer. That the effects we see in these studies are based on the fallibility of human beings and on the teaching effect, right? In part that we get gains in our learning from talking to another real human being with a jagged cognitive profile and prior knowledge, and then adapting to see how can we help each other, right? Well, I always know that ChatGPT is faking it. It always knows everything, and it's just playing a role of being my coach. So anyway, these were the sorts of things that we discussed because they were sort of, for us, edge case, frontier issues that now are basically everyday issues for our students. Sorry, I took a lot of time on that.
So just practically speaking, there's a tool called Open Evidence. Anybody here over here of Open Evidence? Right. Open Evidence essentially is a LLM actually that uses information to provide guidance in terms of taking care of patients. It's part of the reality. And so what I've realized is that the residents and medical students will be using it constantly. When we're reviewing a case, what I'll often do is I'll say, what did Open Evidence say about this patient? And then what I'll try to do is say, okay, here's why what they said seems to be right for this patient. But more often it's, why did what Open Evidence recommend not really fit with this patient so that you can become a better user of the AI in the future? Because it is going to be a large part of your life, and it is absolutely one of the most exciting things in medicine right now, and absolutely one of the most frightening things in medicine right now. But teaching them actually how to look critically at it, I think, is an essential part of what I'm going to do. That's not something I taught 3 years ago. I think it's going to be a large part of what I teach 3 years from now.
One of the biggest challenges I've noticed when working with faculty who are trying to integrate more active learning or redesign their course is the issue of bloated content and what to do. Active learning takes work, right? But it also takes class time and student energy. Like I have a set of ways of talking to faculty about why it's worth it to really think about their goals for their students and, cut that additional content. But there's a tendency and a desire to just pre-pack homework and assignments and pre-work with the extra stuff that then doesn't fit in when they remove, lecture and turn that into an active exercise. And I'm wondering if you have any advice or insight around streamlining course content to make a course more active.
In what context are you working with faculty?
I'm at DCE. Yeah, DCE working with faculty on their courses. So across the board when it comes to subject matter and field and discipline. So you've got, this challenge of, but I need my students to understand this amount of foundational content. But they're packing their courses in. And so getting them to really hone in on deep, complex learning goals, and feel okay throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
So I oftentimes I tell students this too, that there's this great Father Guido Sarducci routine. I don't know if you know that he's still around. He's a comedian who pretends to be an Italian immigrant Catholic priest, right? So there's all kinds of things to unpack there. We could put that on hold for right now, but he has a routine where he is giving it. He's going to sell something he calls 5-minute university, and 5-minute university is he will teach you in 5 minutes everything that you'll remember 5 years after you graduate from the university, right? And this is what I keep telling myself. I have taught students for 25 years, and can't tell you the number of times that the most brilliant student in my class I have the next semester, and I turn to them and I say, "Oh, and you know about this because we talked about it last semester," and they look at me with a complete blank. Right. Or I get an email from a student who's out in the world doing the thing that we were talking about and writes back and says, "I remember we talked about this thing, but I don't remember." They don't even remember how to find out like what it was that we talked about that was so important. So that reminds me that really the idea that I'm supposed to be covering a set of content in a class rather than teaching lessons that allow students to really understand, to find out for themselves is a mistake. And, but it's hard. It's really hard because I think it might be harder in professional schools where you actually have to certify a certain kind of knowledge. Whereas if you're an undergraduate historian, okay, so they don't remember that date. It doesn't really matter. They remember how to ask the question. But I think there's some kind of combination there.
I don't think we can teach people all the nuances of value-based care in an 8-week course. But what we can do is actually get them excited enough about the topic that they want to continue to learn about it. And that's the goal. It's not to teach them about value-based care and teach them a certain amount of content.
Yeah, we teach value-based care together. I guess over time, I've found that I don't get through all my lectures. I have way too much information. So I do make a note of where it landed. And, did I not get through because I had a million questions that maybe I shouldn't have answered all of them? But what I've tried to do is streamline and just make information I think is important optional on Canvas and not required. And I think that might help. And some students came to me this week to say they actually looked at it and then wanted to talk about it. So maybe that is a strategy. And the other thing about, there's so much to learn, but the second half of my course, I kind of repeat the learning. What I want them to learn is the same thing, but I use different hospitals and different organizations. So at the end, there's a core that they know, and I know they're not going to be learning all the things I wish I could teach. But I think it's over time, you just have to let it go.
If we could thank our faculty panelists, we hope you leave this session engaged and not exhausted. Have a great rest of your day, folks.